Welcome to your Astral Crusader Masterclass Guide. I'll be your host JB, and in today's video I'll be explaining exactly how to get the most out of this class. This is the fourth part of my Masterclass series, purpose with getting new players through the entire main story of Xenoblade X, with the goal of teaching you the finer details of how this game works. As always, no endgame builds will be discussed throughout the duration of this video, so please check back later once I've gotten around to making those video guides. Additionally, if you enjoy this content and find it useful, please consider hitting that subscribe button and notification bell, as it's free and it helps me out a ton. With all that out of the way, let's get right into the guide. The Astral Crusader class consists of both the sniper rifle and javelin weapon types, and will potentially be one of the new strongest classes after receiving a variety of buffs in the Definitive Edition. These, in conjunction with the class's original kit, make this a competitive class with a ton of great buff effects, strong offensive arts, and a decent selection of auras, with an overall large focus on dealing electric type damage. As for its stat increases, it receives a bonus to ranged attack and ranged accuracy, emphasizing the sniper's long-range capabilities within the class. The result is an interesting blend of support and offensive potential, leveraging electric type damage to shock enemies to their core, and even provide one of the strongest damage over time options within the entire game. That said, the class overall lacks the high hit count arts which all of the other classes thrive on, and relies entirely on its electric attribute damage output, resulting in a build that can get walled by specific enemy types, and typically takes longer to get going initially before ramping up to the insane funny potential damage output. Your primary weapon for this build will be the sniper rifle, utilizing the class's inherent stat increases to reach truly absurd levels of damage potential. Snipers possess 10 different arts with a plethora of buffs, ranged offensive arts, and even a pretty useful aura effect, enhancing the weapon type's best qualities even further. Even so, very few of this weapon type's arts have more than a single hit, limiting your opportunity to raise the overdrive counter, and thus slowing the process. The weapon type lacks the gravity attribute, but this is negligible overall, due to the class's skills really forcing you down the route of using electric attribute weapons. Auto attack wise, they have a fairly moderate TP gain capability, with each individual shot being much stronger and effective at the cost of a smaller magazine size, lessening the effects of its longer than average cooldown speed. This leads to an overall effective weapon type in the right situations, being excellent in regards to damage potential when everything comes together, but requiring a tad more focus being applied to the game's mechanics. Moving on to the javelin, we actually reach a crossroads where realistically this weapon could be ran as your primary weapon instead of sniper, due to its variety of special effects, but due to the majority of its best arts being locked behind affinity missions, it'll be taking the sub role for today's build. The weapon type has 11 arts and runs into many of the same issues as sniper, that being a large portion of your arts being locked to the electric attribute and many of them possessing only a single hit, though some arts do break away from this trend. Whilst they can come in any attribute, once again, to truly get the most out of this class, you ideally want to focus down the electric route to take advantage of this class's overall strengths. But due to many arts being locked to the attribute already, you can get away with running something else for some variety. As for its auto attacks, I'd say that it's just slightly worse than the longsword overall, having a slightly longer cooldown between hits and a lower TP generation rate, but the difference overall is minuscule. The final product of this weapon therefore results in something that really can do it all by itself, but locked to the confines of Astral Crusader is realistically forced down a very specific path, but that doesn't mean it's any less effective. That brings us to our loadout for today's build, which intends to take advantage of Astral Crusader's high electric damage potential to thoroughly stun your enemy, all the while providing yourself and allies with some of the best buffs in the entire game. Unlike the other classes we've showcased thus far, there isn't actually a standout art to bring the class all together, but there is one art you should realistically always run when available, and that is Overwhelm. This is Javelin's best art and is going going to be our main way to build up the overdrive counter, possessing 3 hits, inflicting fatigue on the enemy, which reduces damage dealt by melee arts and auto attacks, and increases your damage the higher your current HP is, whilst also being a purple art, meaning that during overdrive we will restore a ton of TP each time it's used. As mentioned before, this class's other strength is its variety of buffs, the best of which are Eagle Eye, Hawkeye, and Hair Trigger. Eagle Eye is arguably the best buff art in the entire game, providing a ranged up attack and accuracy buff to the entire party, synergizing crazy well with most other builds and being incredibly effective for scales in particular. Hawkeye grants critical power, which increases your overall critical damage and is a great spam art, and Hair Trigger applies supercharge to yourself, which has since been fixed from the original game, now applying its effect to all hits of the art used and leveraging our damage potential even further. In terms of our aura, you can realistically choose either Ghost Sniper or Raijin, both of which provide us with critical chance up, which is the main reason we want to run them, leaving the final choice up to whether you want to play more offensive or defensively. Ghost Sniper restores TP on crits and further increases your ranged accuracy, whilst Raijin bolsters your survivability, restoring HP with each art and reflecting electric attacks at the enemy, making you immune to that specific attribute. This just leaves our offensive arts where, realistically, once again, we could go down either the Javelin or Sniper routes. For the sake of this video, to avoid forcing you all to grind a ton of affinity missions, we'll be using Afterburner, Sidewinder, and Arcing Horn. Afterburner is our TP art, limiting its spam potential, and despite being unlocked via an affinity mission, as it's fortunately one required for the main story, will still be used on this build. Sidewinder is a phenomenal art that inflicts debuff resistance down, making it all the easier to apply different debuff effects for other arts and skills like Arcing Horn, which inflicts electric resistance down. Absolutely essential, seeing as we rely on the attribute so much. Other arts you may want to consider include Maximum Voltage, a Javelin TP art with 12 hits that requires Alexa's affinity missions to be completed, Trident Buster, a powerful replacement for Afterburner until you unlock it, and our main damaging art on a Javelin build. Both Vortex and Slayonet, sadly requiring you to do Bose's affinity missions, but both of which are incredibly effective, one for building the overdrive counter and the other due to its potential to perform air combos, which I'll talk about in a future video. And finally, Howling Soul, a new buff effect which increases both your ranged and melee attack and is once again party wide, and because the buff is under its own unique name, it'll stack with Eagle Eye's separate ordinary ranged up attack buff. Seeing what I mean in terms of this class having the best selection of buffs? Now comes the bread and butter for this class, being its skills. Specifically, we want to utilize the power of Conductive Strike and Knock and Shock, both of which pair together to ramp up our damage output to absurd levels of monstrosity. Conductive Strike is another effect which was bugged in the original game, only applying the damage increase on the specific damage tick the shock effect activates, but now it works like normal, scaling damage up as long as the effect is active. For your other two skills, I'd go with Electric Boost to ramp up our damage even more, and TP Overdrive, providing us with additional TP each time we use an art, which for obvious reasons is super helpful. Alternatively, if you get unlucky with not finding electric attribute weapons or haven't finished chapter 5 yet, I'd recommend using Third Eye, Combo Gunner, and Boosted Bullets, as we already have a ton of accuracy and these will just help keep our damage output high for right now. Now onto the gear, and as you may expect, we need to talk about Candid Incredible, the arms manufacturer you unlock after chapter 5 and your source for the electric attributes Sniper and Javelin. While it isn't imperative for this class to focus down the electric route, and you could just run any other element that's available, the difference in damage is ridiculous, so I honestly can't recommend pumping Moranium into it enough. We also want to get access to a form of Appendage Crusher, the best and earliest source being via an eye patch that you can obtain by completing Satie's side quest during chapter 3. Appendage Crusher is an independent modifier which multiplies your damage based on something known as the hardness tier tier of an appendage, either reducing your damage to 15% of its normal value or increasing it by 2.5 times, and Appendage Crusher helps shift it towards the latter. As for other traits and gear to look out for, max TP up is always useful as it just makes overdrive easier to maintain and keep going, but for this build specifically, I'd also recommend Resistance Reducer, an effect which simply reduces the enemy's resistance to debuffs, the level 5 variant of which is relatively cheap to craft as an augment and provides a massive 18% of value. As someone other than my custom avatar, that being Lao, as he can largely run the exact same build, with the only difference being he lacks a skill slot, meaning Electric Boost is absent from this example. But either way, let's get right into it. So due to this class's lack of multi-hit arts, we're going to be struggling to build up the counter in the first place, meaning we need to take full advantage of the double overdrive count bonus by going from a green art into either a yellow, orange or purple one. With Overwhelm having our highest hit count out of any of our regular arts, I'd recommend using this every other attack art, interspersing it between just spamming green arts to both extend the overdrive timer and setting up for another double overdrive counter effect. This is why laying your art palette out like such, allowing you to virtually scroll from one art to the next, can be so useful, as it can help make this whole initial process all the more straightforward. Even so, with the sheer amount of TP you should be generating, both from your TP overdrive skill and each hit of your purple art, which refunds 10 TP multiplied by the current overdrive counter, you should be able to reactivate overdrive fairly quickly, extending its duration and giving you some much needed wiggle room in regards to its time limit. From here, even though the counter likely still isn't all that high, as long as you continuously spam those green arts to increase the timer, an inherent effect of both green and blue arts, which extend it based on how high your overdrive counter is, as you can see in the bottom right hand side of the screen, you can now begin using some of your other arts to start ramping up the damage. I normally try to get my aura up first as quickly as possible, again not particularly difficult with all your TP generation, and then focus on going from hair trigger into afterburner whenever possible. Your strongest and highest damage art that also then helps build the counter with its multiple hits. Remember to use Arcing Horn intermittently as well to get electric resistance down applied to the enemy to inflict even more damage, but never, and I mean never, go from this into a yellow art or vice versa. This is the one thing you should never do in overdrive, and is part of the reason I tend to focus either orange or yellow arts, and never typically both, but for this particular build it was quite necessary. To avoid this, always try to link the colours together by either using your purple Overwhelm or a green buff art, which is always in constant supply, and from here, that's pretty much it. It takes a tad longer than the other builds to reach max counter, but once you're there, the shock damage applied via your melee attacks, the insane 300% increased damage from Conductive Strike, supercharge multiplying your afterburner's power once again, and every other buff effects that you apply translates to this being one of the highest damage potential builds within the entire game, falling just short behind Duelist and the Insanity, which is Offensive Stance. A top tip actually, if you want to have even more fun through the main game, is to always try and have Nail in your party, supporting you as she has her own shock art which can activate your skills, as well as a brand new effect known as Conductive Rise, which can roughly triple your damage over time effects, enabling this class and its strengths even further. So even if this route seems kind of like a diamond in the rough, it's still absolutely worth giving it a try and getting the most out of overdrive. And that's pretty much it for explaining how to get the most out of the Astral Crusader class, concluding this masterclass guide. I hope as always that you found this guide useful and that it prevents you from being thunderstruck by Mira's beauty. If it has, I'd once again appreciate it if you'd consider clicking that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future guides within the masterclass series and all of the other exciting Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition content that I plan on bringing you all very soon. I thank you all for watching though, and I'll catch you in the next one. Next time, guys.